Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's time for Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, recorded on June 10th, 2010. My router sucks. Welcome to This Week in Computer Hardware. I am Ryan Shrout, joined by Patrick Norton. Patrick,
hey,
how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing good, man. It's we actually can see the sun and the sky today here in the Bay Area, so it's very exciting.
Is that a change from what has been in the past?
It's a change. We've been going back and forth between this amazing, like real, genuine summer type 70-degree weather, and then 52 degrees and so foggy you can't see the house next door. So I'm kind of excited about this whole blue sky thing right now.
Well, everything's going okay here, with the exception of some internet problems we're having. So if you're watching the video version of this, and I'm running on a Nintendo 63, as people in the chat room are telling me, I apologize. Skype is not cooperating tonight, but as long as we're getting a recording in, that's what counts. So let's talk about what happened in the last week. So last time we talked, I was actually in Taiwan. I am definitely glad to be back. A long journey home. I don't know, about 22 hours total round trip type of thing for me. Since I don't live on the West Coast, I have one more stop than you would having going over that way. But everything went well. We've got a couple of things to talk about that. First thing I wanted to mention, though, was something that's exciting to me, because almost the very first thing I did after getting home and landing that morning was after getting a couple hours of sleep, I went to Best Buy and picked up my pre-ordered HTC EVO 4G.
How about that battery life?
You know, so I come from a lineage of Blackberries and iPhones, and most recently I had the Palm Pre. I've had the Palm Pre since the day it came out, so for more than a year. Mm-hmm. And battery life on it wasn't great either. But I read some reports. I've been more impressed than I thought I was going to be with the battery life on this. I think it has a lot to do with what you're doing on it and that kind of stuff. For example, today I took this off the charger about 8:30 this morning. Haven't been on a charger. Didn't take a lot of phone calls. Did some moderate web browsing and all that kind of stuff. But it's still in the green, and what time is it here? It's 9 p.m., so it's been off for 12 hours, and it says I have 48% of my battery left. So that's actually pretty good. The only thing that I've been doing that might be tweaking the numbers is one of the benefits, in my opinion, of Android. I gotta say, this is my first Android phone also. But one of the things I like is the kind of quick, easy push button switches you have for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and 4G in the case of this phone. Now, I don't have 4G service in my city yet, so it's not a big deal. But what this allows me to do is when I get in the car, I can push the Bluetooth button and it automatically connects to it'll enable Bluetooth, connect to my car, whatever. When I go into the house, I hit a button that turns off Bluetooth and turns Wi-Fi back on. So that's kind of what I've been doing in terms of battery tweaking, really. That's the only thing I've really done. But it's made it through the 3 full days that I've had it without dying on me.
But you've been charging it during that 3 full days.
No,
you haven't charged it at all.
I haven't charged it at all during the day. Mm-hmm. That's kind of.
Are you charging it at night?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I charge it over. Yeah. Yeah. So I charge it overnight, but during the course of the morning through the afternoon through the evening through late night, I probably don't go to bed between 12 and 1 a.m. Put the phone on the charger, wake up at 8, get up, take a shower, take the phone off the charger before I leave. So it's actually done pretty good in that regard, I think.
I think from what I'm hearing from a bunch of people, plugging it into that charger before you go to bed is pretty critical, because people are basically having it on standby and having it run through its battery overnight. People are running into issues when people who spend like 4 hours a day on the phone seem to be running into issues, heavy GPS use without a car charger. It does seem to be a little battery hungry. I don't think the Snapdragon processor, or maybe it's the screen, is quite as efficient as everybody had hoped it would be. But how do you like the performance? Has it been snappy? Is it exciting? Is it the most vibrant, high speed handset you've ever touched?
I tell you, it's so like I said, it's my first Android phone. I've played with the original Droid and the Droid Incredible, but just for a half a day or so, and it's been really, really responsive. It's been very, very fast. Turning on one of the things with the Palm Pre was turning on when they updated to support a video camera. Turning on the video camera took 30 seconds to 60 seconds for it to boot up before you could actually start recording a video. Not the case with this. Everything seems very responsive. The only time that I've felt what I would consider noticeable slowdown on the phone is if I have Google Goggles running, which uses the camera and it's also doing data uploading, all that kind of stuff at the same time. If I don't close that application, things bog down a lot. But otherwise, I've been more impressed than I guess I was expecting to be with my first Android device. And a huge 4.3-inch screen, the YouTube HQ high quality videos that you can get on this phone are pretty impressive. The navigation works well. The amount of applications that you can get, while not as many as you can get in the iPhone ecosystem, it's much, much better than what I was used to with the Pre for the last year.
Yeah, you're the only person I've met who actually bought a Pre. So, I feel bad for Palm, but I'm like, I'm kind of like, oh, a Pre user, yay! Do you miss the Pre?
I actually liked the Pre. Everybody, I got kind of the same response from a lot of people when I told them which phone I had because there were so few of us out there. The Pre ran well. It did very well with its multitasking with the operating system. I did tweak the operating system or hack the OS so that I overclocked the CPU. I think it took it from like 550 to 800 megahertz or something like that. Bought the extended battery for it, which fit in the same form factor, but was I think 20 to 25% more capacity. I ordered the same equivalent for this phone from a company called CDO. They make some pretty good accessories for these types of devices. So I actually really liked the Pre. The problem was developer support for it was awful. It was really tough seeing people get applications for iPhones and new things coming out. Sling Player, I loved on my BlackBerry. I loved on the iPhone. And I loved on the iPad that I couldn't get on the Pre. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really comfortable with this Android phone now is that I have an iPad. I have an iPad 3G, so I get my fix of the iPhone ecosystem for those parts of it that are what I consider good and beneficial. I can still access that, but I'm not tied to AT&T for my cell phone service if I don't want to be.
You're just tied to Sprint.
Right, which I like their cell phone service better. Right. So that's not bad for me. And I kind of like the idea of supporting the practices of Google's Android operating system over what I would consider worse consumer-friendly practices for the iPhone, right? So, that's a whole other debate we don't really need to get into. But I kind of like having the ability to reach into both worlds. Same thing with the Pre, still having that to be able to kind of play around with things. I wish the Pre had been more successful, but c'est la vie, I guess.
Oh, we'll see what HP does with it. So yeah. You still have news from Computex floating around, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things that I saw after we talked last week, and I wanted to mention these real quick. The first one is, about the GeForce GTX 400 series. So the 480, the 470, and most recently the 465. Now, the GTX 470 is kind of like their mid-range now. Galaxy, a company that a lot of people maybe never heard of, but they have been manufacturing NVIDIA's cards for quite a long time, is selling a GTX they're not selling it. They're developing a GTX 470 dual GPU card. So two of these monsters on a single PCB. That's 6 billion plus transistors.
How many power? I'm having a vision of like 4 power ports on the side of that thing.
Right now, they only had two 8-pin power connectors, which I agree with you. I was a little surprised because I've seen some dual GPU AMD cards from ASUS that their prototypes developing that actually had 3 connectors, and I expected to see at least 3 on this as well. Now, this is still a prototype. Maybe it's not 100% stable with just 2 8-pin connectors, and maybe that's why they're kind of feeling around. They're trying to get opinions and views from the press and consumers on whether or not they would buy something like this. I would imagine it would have to have an enormous or very heavy heatsink on it because, you know, if you look at the power consumption that a single 470 has, and we can look at the power consumption of what an SLI configuration has and say it's going to be pretty close to that.
I'm thinking like one PCI Express slot, 4 slots inside your PC, an additional fan for the cooling.
Yeah, I mean, it would be pretty intense, but it was cool to see. It was cool to see somebody working on something like that, even though NVIDIA has not started working on something like that yet. What would be interesting is if they take the 465 GPU, which is still the same size, same number of transistors, but fewer of the shaders are enabled on it. So it's going to run significantly lower power and cooler. And maybe they replace those GPUs on that card and get better options for cooling and performance that way as well. So what else was there? Oh,
MSI, external graphics. Is it actually finally going to happen?
Well, that's a question I had for you.
To a box, to my monitor, 3D gaming, upgradable externally, off my notebook forever and ever.
Right. That's the question, because what they were showing wasn't truly revolutionary. It was a little external box that held a discrete graphics card, desktop graphics card, that you then plugged into a card through the PCI or through the Express Card 34 slot on a laptop, and then connected a monitor up to that, or multiple monitors up to that external card. And the thing is like you're saying, we've seen several of these before. We've seen them from ASUS, as I think maybe even 2 years ago, but they were using a custom configuration or a custom interconnect to the computer. We saw one from AMD with an Acer Ferrari notebook just at CES in January, and it also used a custom interconnect to go between the external box and the laptop. The idea, as you're saying there, is that you have like maybe a laptop like this Lenovo kind of X200 size. It gets 7 hours of battery life when you need it to, but you've got your little box at your desktop with 2 extra monitors hooked up, and it's got an external graphics card in it. Plug it in when you get home. You don't have to worry about battery life. It's going to be plugged in, but you get great gaming performance out of it. The idea is fantastic, but do you actually see there being an audience for that, or a demand for something like that? Would it ever really catch on in your view?
I don't know. I mean, it's certainly, it's almost like, if you look at the VIG, like the price difference usually get charged for a gaming notebook that's maybe good for a year, 18 months, 2 years if you stretch it. And they're usually big and heavy and seriously expensive. If somebody's seriously into gaming, they want to do 3D gaming, it's a really interesting idea, because the processors in the notebooks aren't that far behind. But nobody wants to deal. Yeah, I think there's a market for it. Is it a huge market? No. If they keep the price to $130 and then you throw in your own GPU inside of that, I think they could definitely pick up some people. I want to see you guys get it in for testing and see what the actual performance is, because I'm still like, it's just like, okay, is CardBus really going to do something useful for us at this point?
Right.
Or not card. Is it CardBus?
Express Card.
Express Card, yeah.
Express Card.
Sorry, I'm like,
they've transitioned pretty quickly. From what I can tell,
CardBus Express Card. Sorry.
Express Card is very similar to PCI Express, and I believe you can actually buy adapters today that will work. Like, you can buy a card that it will go to a PCI Express card slot, or PCI Express slot today, but they're limited to 1x speed. So that's kind of limiting for graphics card performance. It's still going to be well ahead of standard performance on any of these graphics cards, or most of the graphics cards inside notebooks. Obviously, if you start getting into the really expensive high-end Dells and Alienwares and that kind of stuff, it's a different thing. But the problem with testing them is really there's no retail market for this yet. Everything is in a prototype stage. Everybody's afraid to really hand it out to us yet. I mean, because when we had that Acer netbook that supported that connection type, and we asked AMD for a solid month while we had this netbook in house. It's like, can we get one of those XGPs? We really want to see what it does. Look, we'll look at it as a beta device, as something still in development. We just want a proof of concept like you're asking for, to prove to developers, to prove to OEMs, to prove to consumers that this is a viable option. And we haven't gotten anybody to bite yet, which kind of tells me that maybe the technology isn't as good as they want us to believe yet.
Right.
But I love the idea of, having this ThinkPad X200 sitting here that I take to Taiwan when I don't need to game, and I can get 7 hours of battery life, but I don't have to have a separate machine to play games on with an external display, because when you start looking at the Core i5 processors that are in these notebooks, they are fast enough to play games. It's the GPUs that are really holding everything back, whether it be an integrated NVIDIA or AMD or even the integrated Intel on it, right? That's even more limiting than it could be. So maybe these guys think that waiting for the Fusion parts from AMD and the Sandy Bridge parts from Intel is really the safer game, because they don't have to worry about external contraptions and QA procedures and all that kind of stuff. And they think, well, this next generation will be enough for people to be happy playing games on. So,
meanwhile, you can just play around with the Alienware M11x.
Right. Which looks like it was going to be. I think we got a Twitter question about that later on. But to address it now, it looked like, or wasn't it? It was an email I got from somebody talking about the Alienware M11x R2. The revision of it uses Core i5 and Core i7 mobility processors, and I think it has an Optimus based system in it, so NVIDIA GPU. Real quick to answer that guy's question, as far as i5 or i7, not a real big difference in performance. We're really only talking about clock speed and a little bit of cache size difference. If there's a significant price difference, I would just go for i5. Have you actually played with one of these M11s yet?
Yeah, we actually had an M11X in for review on Alienware M11X in for review on Texilla, and when I could pry it out of Roger Chang's hands, because he was hot and heavy for it after CES, I was impressed actually, because it's small, it's light. You turn off the GPUs, you have decent battery life. Not quite the 10 hours we were hoping for, but a good 6-7 hours, and the gaming performance was really solid. I'm not the hugest first-person shooter gamer, but it was a fantastic piece of hardware. A little, ostentatious.
Well, that's what you get with Alienware devices, really, isn't it? I mean, you pay a little bit more for the kind of look, appearance, right? A little head with the glowing eyeballs on the outside of it. That too.
It's all about the alien head.
So what do you have there for show and tell? I was told that you were going to have something to show off, to kind of demonstrate for us here.
Well, it's not so much to demonstrate. We just actually just got this one in for review. You've talked about Drobo on the show a whole bunch of times. I got a Drobo FS in that I am just unboxed. Look, kids, it's a Drobo lid that gives you the information on the lighting scheme. And it's Drobo's latest... Basically, they've dropped the Drobo share, which originally was basically a slice that you stacked a Drobo on top of. And the Drobo share is basically, I should say, the Drobo FS. You're running 5 drives, so you've got redundancy for up to 2 of the drives. So if you can basically 2 drives can die at once, and they're claiming 4x the speed over the Drobo share, which is a pretty nice improvement. And you'll notice, if I can get it up to the camera without killing anyone, it's Ethernet only, which is a big change. So this is basically a full-on network attached storage device supporting up to, I want to say, close to, well, not close to, it'd be 10 terabytes worth of drives, because 2 terabyte drives are the max right now. Right. So I'm going to be curious to see how this performs compared to, if it really is as fast as it's supposed to be, and also looking at what's going on with it versus one of the HP Windows Home servers we've had in for a while, and kind of looking at the performance and streaming actually like Blu-ray ISOs off of it over the network, which is a really fun thing to do.
Do you feel that the fact that it's Ethernet only is a little limiting, or they obviously have other models that kind of address those other like USB and markets like that, right?
Well, they still have the original Drobo, right? Which they've got the Drobo S is the sort of equivalent box with 5 drives where it does the data scrubbing. It's got redundancy across 2 drives if you have 5 drives inside of there. And I'm trying to remember if it has 800 on the back, or for the Drobo S, it's got eSATA and FireWire, FireWire 800 and 2.0. That's on the back of the Drobo S. The FS is the file server or file sharing device. It's got gigabit Ethernet. And then they've got the regular Drobos, which do not have eSATA but still offer the USB and FireWire 800. And those are actually, you know, for local storage, you go for the Drobo or the Drobo S. For a NAS, you go for the Drobo FS. Or you know, get out your old piece of hardware and build yourself an Unraid box or a free NAS. So the gigabit Ethernet is theoretically limited to a top speed of 125 megabytes per second. Yeah. Obviously, probably you are storage limited at that point. Yeah, depending on what arrays if you've got 5 drives full and you're doing like RAID 5, you would get 10 terabytes like you were saying before, right? So I mean that's pretty good, and I would imagine that would be relatively quick. Does it support like iSCSI directly to another system, or is it a network attached unit only? At this point, I've just been playing around with it, running it over the network. I have to play around with that I don't know off the top of my head if it does iSCSI, and I should, because I was reading through that earlier. At this point, I've been rebuilding the test network that we use for HD Nation for streaming video, and in the process, basically rebuilding it's just because we have this severely, as my eyes roll into the back of my head, we have this severely locked down corporate network here at work that is super secure, and there's like 5 secured routers in between our studio and the main office, because the studio office is down the hall. So literally bandwidth, and then the way the wireless is segmented separately from the Ethernet. So in some cases, it's almost impossible to get consumer equipment to actually connect inside of our network between the wireless and the wired networks. So I'm actually just building up a small consumer-based Ethernet and wireless network for testing, and finishing that up, and then doing the Drobo FS testing, because it's tired of having network issues, especially with consumer appliances, which tend to be a little more sensitive to network protocols than computers, Mac or PC or Linux for that matter. So cool. Part of the excitement. And I think more and more people are starting to realize the benefits of having a network drive. For instance, my wife, not a tech person at all. Recently we moved her from a desktop computer to a laptop computer as her primary machine, kind of where we had a monitor keyboard docking area for her, but then she takes the laptop to school with her and that kind of stuff. We had the hard drive die on the laptop, and I was able to do the freezer trick that I'm sure you're aware of, and got it up and running long enough to copy the important stuff off of it. Now we're going to worry about setting up a network attached storage, maybe looking at Carbonite and that kind of thing, because I back up my stuff to different PCs, but she's never really needed to do that. But she's also the family photographer, I guess we'll say. Right. So she has all the pictures of all of our nieces and nephews and all that kind of stuff. So now that she realizes that a hard drive can die and everything can go kaput real quickly, she's extra worried about all that. So I think consumer NAS devices are really going to be key as we get further into the world of digital multimedia and everybody moving everything over to that. So yeah, I also am a huge fan of offsite backups, whether you do it by keeping one drive, you rotate drives and keep one at work and one at home, or use something like Carbonite or Mozy or one of the other online services. Because I had an aunt and uncle that were burned out of their house twice. I live in earthquake country where I can literally expect my house to shake off its foundation and burn to the ground. So uplifting. I don't. It's not uplifting. It's uplifting when after the house gets swallowed by the earth and crushed in some sort of epic biblical mayhem act of an earthquake, that I can be like, hey, the pictures are still up on the server in the cloud. Assuming that's true. That's always good. Let's see. One last thing from Computex I thought was kind of interesting to discuss here. I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea of an all-in-one PC. Think of the iMac, think of the HP Touch Smart, I think is what it's called. So where it's a monitor with a computer inside of it. For the most part, those have really been one and done type devices. You can't really change anything inside of them, especially if you start looking at the Apple devices. They don't even want you, as far as I can tell, there aren't any screwdriver holes. It's an intricate process to get inside. ECS is a company you might not think of for
some kinds of unique devices like this, but they had both a 3D and a touchscreen all-in-one PC that was unique in that it actually stored an entire full-size PC in the back of it, and it was user upgradable, user accessible. It had a full-size motherboard, full-size graphics card, 3.5-inch hard drive. You could swap out the graphics card. It was a single-slot graphics card area there. So it was interesting to me because as people who listen to this show, and Patrick, you and I are hands-on people, I at least me personally don't really like to have a whole lot of hardware that I can't get inside and touch and change around and do things to. And all-in-one PCs have kind of been, we've shied away from them because of that reason here. But here was one where ECS was showing at Computex where you could go in and you could upgrade things. I mean, you could actually take the casing off and replace essentially the entire system and leave the monitor there, have one connection going from the graphics card to the back of the display. So you still have like a cable, but it was a short, 2-foot cable that was hidden behind everything. So it had the same effect as a real smooth all-in-one, but it was a little bit thicker.
Oh, I was going to say, as long as you had like a micro ATX type motherboard with an external power source. Because it'd be kind of ugly to strap your ATX power supply onto the back of that monitor with your baling wire or duct tape.
Hey, but if it's all behind it, who cares, right? You can't see all that. Just make sure it's really close up against the wall. No, you're right.
I mean, laugh, but I've relied on things being pressed up against the wall to make sure they weren't too ugly for everybody in the house.
That's how you know you're doing things right, in my view. So, so that was kind of rounds out things from Computex. There was a lot of what I think interesting things there, more new than I expected in the world of computer hardware, but still a lot of focus on tablet devices and stuff, things we talked about last week. So there will be lots to look forward to going into the rest of the year. Now let's talk about some news closer to home here. You had a couple of interesting items in here. What Flash Player 10.1 ships for Windows means it's no longer in beta. So
yes,
actual everyday people will be able to get it.
Well, yeah, it's no longer in beta for Windows. They haven't, the Gala project stuff hasn't been folded into it yet. That's still separate. I partially bring this up because I'm pretty sure you do. I know, especially on HD Nation and on Twitter, when I was asking about questions for this show, a bunch of people are like, man, I want a netbook that can do 1080p Hulu. Which is kind of one of the grails for a lot of people, and the NVIDIA Ion even has trouble dealing with Hulu in a 1080p format. Flash obviously is a massive problem, just wasting CPU cycles for a lot of people, and so 10.1 introduces hardware acceleration for Flash, which is great. This is awesome. This is exciting. This makes me happy. I do want to check it out with the Broadcom Crystal HD, which is the which is the mini PCI card that you can hopefully, I'm hoping it'll be able to drop it into an open slot in one of my Dell Minis so that I can actually take advantage of the HDMI port on the side of that notebook to use it as a media server when I'm out on the road. But yeah, I'm just really excited that 10.1 is going final. I want OS 10 to catch up and everything else. So we've got full Flash hardware acceleration, Flash video hardware acceleration, which we haven't had yet or for a long time, or period, unless you were running the beta drivers.
Right. The beta worked well in my experience in terms of working with AMD and NVIDIA graphics hardware. The problem was it was beta, so it wasn't pushed out to the mass audience, right? So you really had to know what you were looking for and purposely go out and get it if you were looking for that type of technology. So now the idea is, the Flash 10.1 upgrade gets pushed to everybody by that wonderfully annoying Adobe Updater application. And so we see a proliferation.
Screaming out of my operating system.
Yeah, I agree. It's how many times can I say remind me later? So yeah, that's pretty cool. And actually, I didn't know that the Crystal HD chip was going to be available in kind of like an add-in option there, because we have our mobile editor at PC Perspective has an Asus Ion, or not Ion netbook, but an Asus EPC with the Crystal HD chip in it that he's doing testing on now. But I was under the assumption that it was not an add-on card, but it was actually, built into the design on the PCB itself. Maybe they're doing both. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe they're only doing the add-in like you were suggesting. So that would be a cool upgrade.
I was going to say, I know for some vendors they're using they may well be integrating it on the motherboard. Possibly, I think most of the vendors are using boards that come straight from Intel in whatever configuration, and then adding in a PCI Express mini card. XBMC actually had a really good post talking about doing basically better 1080p acceleration, and they point to a link up on, let me pull up, logicsupply.com, where you can actually pick up the Broadcom hardware decoder, the mini PCI card, for about $50. So I'm actually adding it to my cart now, because I realized that I didn't order it last week. So I'm like, I got to order it before it all sells out.
Order it for all these people that are listening and paying attention. Get it first. So something else interesting that I wanted to briefly mention is a tool for Eyefinity. Have you ever, do you have Eyefinity set up? Probably not. Have you used it, tested it, seen it, played with it one at all?
I've seen it. I've played around with it a little bit. I have not done any extensive testing with it. We actually had Lloyd Case brought up his Eyefinity test setup, but I am not an Eyefinity user at home. So I have a simple dual display.
Either, but I'm not at home, but we have a setup here at the office that we're constantly kind of playing around with. And Colleen, who people who are familiar with the show have been around for more than a handful of episodes remember, bought the HD 5870 graphics card when it first came out, the first Radeon that supported 3-display Eyefinity configurations. And the problem that I think a lot of people that she had, and I think many other people had with first-person shooter games, is you got this fisheye effect on the side monitors, where essentially what was happening was your resolution increased, say, from 1920 by 1080 to 5760 by 1080, because you have three 22-inch or 24-inch 1080p monitors next to each other. The images on the sides would be stretched horizontally because the field of view that the game developer is programming for was limited, usually to like 90 degrees. It's just kind of the way 3D physics works. So when the AMD driver was creating a unique resolution, the games weren't really designed for that. So it still worked. You still got to see more, but it was stretched at the side. You could see if you stood still in the game and you rotated and you looked at somebody and then you followed it around, you could see their head grow progressively larger as they got towards the edge of the screen, that kind of thing. Well, a little tool came out this week only for Valve source games, but there are a lot of those, the Day of Defeat, Left 4 Dead, Left 4 Dead 2, Portal, Half-Life games, that will let you import a .res file, res file, and then make some changes to it and download a new version and copy it to your directory that will remove the fisheye effect from Valve source games. And it's a neat little tool. If you go to widescreengamingforum.com/FOVcalc.php, or you can search Google for what's it called? Delphium's Field of View and Aspect Ratio Calculator. And it's
that just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? You put in what your single monitor's resolution is, what the new resolution is going to be. It'll support as many monitors up or down as you have, if you have 3 or if you have 6, that kind of thing. And then it gives you a new file that you can up or download and copy to the right directory on your computer, and voila, things work beautifully. We have tested out now. It works. It does what it's supposed to do, and things look better because of it. Because my issue has always been, I don't need the game to artificially fisheye things on the side. I will let my own peripheral vision do that same effect or whatever it needs to do to make it as realistic as possible. Same reason I'm not a big fan of the depth of field in games, because they want you to focus on something. It's like, well, my eyes already do that, and if I don't want to look over there, it kind of screws up the game. But the tool works great. It's a little disappointing that it's only for this particular engine, but at least it's a start. I would like to see AMD themselves doing this work. I'd like to see why wasn't. I mean, this seems like such a simple tool. Is done completely by voluntary work by members of the widescreengamingforum.com website.
Wow,
that has been around forever, right? Since the first widescreen monitors created problems with PC gaming all those years ago. It's basically the same thing happened with Eyefinity, but just multiplied times 3. because of your monitors. And it's a little disappointing that AMD didn't create this tool, that they didn't, at least instruct the press. Well, here's some of the settings you can change around with some of the major game engines to fix these types of things, because this makes it a much more enjoyable experience. I think, if you look at Colleen's only complaint about it, here's a girl that has 3 30-inch displays, right? There's not a whole lot of people that have 3 30-inch displays, and she was the perfect person to run Eyefinity for PC gaming, and she couldn't do it because she didn't like the depth or the fisheye effect. So now there's at least a change for some of it. So
this is a good thing.
Yes,
although
always
for
is.
Most of us don't actually have more tied up in our monitors than we have in our cars.
Right. I would never tell somebody to go buy 3 30-inch monitors unless you have a lot of money. But you can get 3 24-inch displays now for, let's see, what are they, $200 a piece, $200 to $250 a piece. So we're talking $700, $750, well under the price of a single 30-inch display, right? No, so, absolutely. It's kind of interesting to do that. And actually, at Computex, I had an interesting discussion with AMD, and they were pushing, their CPU and GPU platform versus Intel with any other GPU platform. And they're like, well, you can get a 6-core processor, AMD's 6-core processor, for like $700 less than Intel's 6-core processor. And maybe with that $700, you go buy 3 24-inch panels and you have an Eyefinity gaming setup for the same price that you would be able to get for a single monitor setup through the Intel platform. And then, there's pros and cons of that, but it was an interesting way to look at the value of a system.
But also it's like, buying the most expensive possible Intel processor out there is more expensive than buying one of our more reasonably priced processors. Because if Intel decides to really get serious about 6-core processors being at the consumer level, yes, I think that $700 go out and buy yourself 3 brand new 24-inch monitor gap is going to fall pretty quickly. I could be wrong.
I agree. Intel, if they really wanted to, could start releasing 6-core processors for a competitive price. But yeah, I mean, Intel's highest price processor over $1,000. AMD's highest price consumer processor like $250, $275. I mean, those are big differences there. Let's see what else. Oh, did you read anything about this? I think this just came out today. Somebody pointed it to me right before we started the show. Motorola apparently at a conference call or on a conference call or meeting with investors, something, semi-official like that, talked about they were going to have by the end of this year a superphone that ran at 2 gigahertz on the Android operating system, and apparently was going to run an NVIDIA Tegra processor. Don't know. Go ahead.
There were people talking about this back in last summer, actually, that there would be Tegra phones on a couple of the networks, at the end of 2009, but I don't think anything came of that. But yeah, the idea of Motorola building a Tegra phone, what would the battery life be on that? I have no idea. I don't think the power consumption is there yet for a mobile Tegra device. I could be horribly wrong, but
NVIDIA talks a lot about Tegra in the mobile world. We don't see a lot of examples of it. The Zune HD is one. It has pretty good battery life, but it's not really using nearly as much of the computational power of would. Now the Microsoft Kin phones, love them or hate them, use a Tegra processor as well. And I haven't read enough about them to know what their battery life is.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Boy Genius Report article on this, and they're basically, Josh said the end of year Android superphone powered by a 2 gigahertz processor. And I guess conceivably Tech did the original report on that one.
Yeah. So, but what they're talking about, other features, they say camera that's more than 5 megapixels, HD video recording, HD display, 720p out, flash 10.1 gyroscope. None of those really stand out to me as something that's not already available or within reason, right? I think, the HTC EVO, the 4G has HD video recording, 720p out, HDMI out, camera more than 5 megapixels, all that kind of stuff. So, and 2 gigahertz is better than 1 gigahertz. I don't think people are going to argue with that, but if it comes at a severe penalty in your battery life, you know, just to say you have the fastest phone out there, I hope that's not what their goal is. So.
Let's see what Motorola comes out with. Yeah, one of the big notes in the original, conceivably tech.com did the original article, and it's like, yeah, full flash 10.1 hardware acceleration and a gyroscope. So I don't know, Android's moving so fast, and okay.
Yeah, you know? I agree. It's like, if you can do it, more power to you. I would love to buy your phone, right? But you've got to prove it first. And it's been a while since Motorola has proven anything in the phone market, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, it'd also be interesting to look at the performance of the Tegra versus the Snapdragon stuff versus, you know, Apple's A4, which is essentially an overclocked ARM processor from everything I've read. So, you know, and doing cross-platform side-to-side mobile phone comparisons across a couple of different operating systems is sort of a benchmarking nightmare at best.
Oh gosh, yeah, almost impossible to do.
Speaking of which, XP is dying on netbooks. October.
Are you happy about that?
Yeah, actually, I love XP. I've used it for years. I avoided Vista assiduously in my home and at work, except on one test machine. So I'm a little sad. You know, I'd like to see some more optimizations to Windows 7. For the super ultralight mobile platform, although maybe Microsoft has already forgotten about netbooks and has started thinking forward to their iPad killer, laugh, giggle, snort. But yeah, October pre-installs for XP on netbooks. I mean, I think part of what I find super frustrating is that so many netbooks were given a just a pitiable amount of the Intel Microsoft build agreements that have so many netbooks with a single gigabyte of RAM and no ability to upgrade them without upgrading the entire board that held the RAM and the CPU and the, you know, RAM soldered down on the board. I just, you know, I'm a little pissed that they had that restriction on XP, period, because I, you know, much rather have 2 gigabytes of RAM on a notebook than 1 gigabyte of RAM. You know, my whinging aside on that, yeah, I think it's time to let go of Windows XP.
Is this the last place for Windows XP to die?
I'm sure they're still going to. I'm sure they're still leaving the door open for major corporate customers that need XP for desktops. I have no doubt that the licensing is there's you know, they may not be talking very loudly about it, but if somebody with 80,000 seats needs a few thousand seats here or there for XP, I don't really see them saying no on that one. You know, licensing agreements for large corporations are kind of, you know, large and flexible and run vastly differently from anything you and I would buy. So
right. That's the key, is they're treated very differently than the consumer, which is fine. That's where they make the most of their money, right? You sent a link along to a very unique iPad hack that it took a while for I guess it's a Japanese website for it to come up, but Gizmodo has posted some of these pictures that make it a little bit easier.
I think the Hyrack.info is the original site in Japan, and they did a beautiful case mod on an original, like, full-on, you know, early Apple Macintosh, so that they could actually fit the iPad into the front of it. The Gizmodo article is welcome to iPad, please wait, system booting. But they've got a video that plays on there, and it's a really slick hack because they basically took the faceplate off, removed the guts, took the faceplate off, and then carved out the side of the faceplate to create a track so you could slide the iPad into the Macintosh. So now I'm gonna be watching, you know, wandering through the local Goodwill looking for an original Macintosh so I can hack one into there so I can put my Bluetooth keyboard in front of the classic Macintosh with the iPad inside. I just thought it was a really nice piece of hardware hacking.
I'm watching the video now. That's actually a Macintosh base that they kind of gutted, or did they create?
Yeah, that's a Macintosh Classic. That is a full-on Macintosh Classic that used to have a big fat CRT inside of it, and they gutted it and set it up so it just happens to be that the iPad fits quite nicely inside of there.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I might have to check out some flea markets now too. I didn't realize that was actually kind of like something you could just buy. I thought they made that whole, you know, kind of fab that case out. But If that just happens to be a coincidence that the 4.3 display fits and works, I think that should be a nice hunt for everybody.
I spent most of my college years doing, writing, or I should say, editing desktop layout in, oh my goodness, not PageMaker, but this is StyleWriter. I can't remember the name of the layout software I used to use. It's been so long since I touched it. But yeah, that is a genuine Macintosh Classic case that has been seriously modded. I just thought it was a great mod.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't think I never used one of those computers, but even I can appreciate that. Let's jump into, we've got a few Twitter questions to go through, quite a few actually. I think we've already addressed a couple of them. But let's see, I'm going to ask this one because I'm in the same boat as Andros Lee here, who says, I think my WRT54G router crapped out. Recommendations on good new wireless router, maybe even 802.11n. And I'm asking you this because I don't know, I've probably gone through 3 or 4 routers in the last 3 to 4 months because they all have very different issues, and I think it's just they don't get along with me very well recently.
Yeah, wireless routers. Wireless routers either seem to work. Oh my goodness! Hold on a second. I don't know if you can hear that. I opened up the Linksys webpage and this giant flash video popped up doing soothing and kind of disturbing new agey kind of music.
Nice.
What kind of, have you been running into connectivity issues or propagation issues or overall performance issues? Or
so my particular issue, his issue seems to be that it's just dead. My issue was I have a Netgear WNDR 3700 802.11n dual band 2.4 and 5 simultaneous. One of the highest end consumer routers you could buy was like $140, $150. I was like, look, I'm just going to get this and be done with it. Recently, we had a problem where certain devices could connect to it just fine. My the EVO, my MacBook, one laptop could connect to it on the internet just fine. Meanwhile, my wife's laptop, my wife's desktop that uses a wireless card could connect to the network, but they couldn't get on the internet. They couldn't even ping the router. We were getting destination host unreachable errors from the command prompt and things like that. And the only way to solve it was to disable all security on the router. We leave it as an open network, which obviously I don't want to do.
But why not?
I reverted firmware versions. I did reset to factory defaults and reconfigured everything, and still the same thing was happening. And the oddest part is all of those devices had connected to that router at some point in the last 3 to 4 weeks, and all of a sudden they were not. So
I was amazed. I recently had the problem. My wife had an original not Core 2 Duo, but Core Duo Macintosh, or I should say MacBook. And the network performance started getting flaky. And then it got to the point where it couldn't actually connect to the network unless you sat in one place in the house that was directly above where the router lives in the sort of garage basement space. So in that case, it actually turned out it's a pretty common problem. The heat. The unbelievable amount of heat generated off of the CPU on that notebook I think it either fries. I think it fries the 802G board, the Wi-Fi board inside of the notebook. In any case, the thing gets worse and worse, and then eventually dies. And then you crack open the notebook and swap in a new, drop $60 for a PCI Express board or a mini PCI Express board that's compatible and swap it in, or a mini PCI board that's compatible and swap it in. I just think routers are starting to suck a lot more than they used to.
I get that feeling too, and it's like everything should be getting better. I don't understand this part.
I think there's a weird phase. I upgraded to one of the new Linksys routers. Smallnetbuilder.com is a website when I'm shopping around for routers and stuff. I think they do the most thorough testing of anybody out there for consumer grade hardware. And I actually bought 2 new Linksys routers, one to run 802.11n and one to run 802.11g, because I didn't want to run. Basically, I just wanted to keep 8G and N separate to try to get the maximum performance. I find it really frustrating that most of the new routers out there, not all of them, but a lot of the new routers use internal antennas, which in theory,
this one does.
Yeah, in theory, you should be able to engineer an internal antenna that it's usually a pattern on a PCB board. in theory, you could engineer one that may be effective as an exterior antenna, but in reality, I find they don't perform as well, especially in my case, if you're dealing with parts of the house. Stucco is really common in the part of San Francisco I live in, and stucco is essentially a wire mesh with concrete laid over it.
That can be not conducive to wireless.
It's not conducive to wireless because there's sort of the house, which is fairly small, and there's a stairwell, and on either side of the stairwell is the stucco, which means you have 2 layers of mesh in between one side of the house and the other side of the house if the router is positioned too low. So the oddities of home construction in San Francisco aside, it's really interesting to look at, in terms of Wi-Fi propagation, receiver sensitivity followed by antenna sensitivity or strength followed by transmitter strength are the kind of the 3 things that determine performance. And they make it really hard usually to find these exact specs. But if you were like out buying a Wi-Fi card and you want the best propagation, the strongest receiver strength is actually the most important thing in terms of getting the best coverage out of the card. Same thing for a router. I've got to be honest with you. I've got a new Belkin N router in that I'm testing, and I'm doing that side by side with the Linksys I have. And I'm kind of really curious because I also have a couple of early pre-N products, some old Buffalo stuff that I'm going to be playing around with in the house. Mostly kind of to search to see which of the devices I can get. I want to see if I can get N to work in all 4 corners of my house. It's not a real noble goal, but I think it's going to turn out with N, and certainly with the WiGig stuff. The WiGig group has already said, the Wi-Fi and the WiGig group both together have said, you're going to need multiple WiGig devices, access points, WAPs, to cover your house, period. Because the wavelength is going to be super short, which means the shorter the wavelength, the less likely it is to go through the walls. It's not 2.4; it's much higher even than 5 gigahertz. So I'm kind of curious to see that. At this point, I have most of my house hardwired for gigabit Ethernet from the home theater totem, where I've got the Roku box, the Apple TV, the Blu-ray player, the DirecTV box. That's all wired gigabit Ethernet. I've got gigabit Ethernet going to the server downstairs, to my main desktop, and I'm actually about to snake around some Ethernet into the other half of the house, because I think to get the performance I want for all of the devices, I'm going to need 802.11 routers at both ends of the house. What's kind of
I tried to do that in my house. Unfortunately, yeah.
But go ahead.
I was going to say, I tried to do that in my house when it was being built, and one of the subcontractors ripped all the cabling I ran before the drywall went up out, so that was pretty fun. And I didn't find out till after I moved in and started punching holes in walls looking for cables. Aren't there anymore? So that was a fun week.
Oops.
Yeah. So which one, if we had to recommend one to Andros Lee today, what do you think you would recommend? Sorry, I didn't mean to hit the mic there. I'm not really happy recommending anything right now. I don't want to take that responsibility either. Somebody in the chat room linked to a D-Link DIR655. This is kind of an older router, 802.11 in draft. It's selling for like $87 at Newegg now. I had heard good things about this. I believe, surprisingly, one of the best places that I go to look for these reviews is like Newegg, looking at the customer reviews, or Amazon customer reviews. I just immediately go towards the negative ones and read what they were complaining about. And if I read it and I go, well, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, I can, ignore that problem and move on and that kind of stuff.
Sorry, I'm like sitting here looking through the small net builder, some of their latest reviews. Yeah. And they're looking like the latest reviews they have up there is the Linksys, the E1000, which has just come out, which I didn't even realize it releases that
model number.
Yeah, it's a brand new router they've just released. Looking at that, looking for the D-Link Extreme N and Buffalo Technology. Their testing is so exhaustive, it gets kind of painful to try to figure out kind of what's going on in terms of the individual performance. Well, they run so many different tests in terms of looking at like various positions inside their test house and internal. Yeah, average wireless throughput ranked the E1000 in the middle of the pack for single band N routers. It's like a $75 router. All right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go through, I'm going to spend some quality time with these routers this week and playing around with small net builder and see what I can find out what's working for me.
That's fair. That's fair.
Sorry, this question was kind of a surprise. I missed that one in the rundown. Sorry, everybody.
No, it's all right. Let's see. Simon Zarafa says, is socket 1156 going to last, or will it be replaced anytime soon? Which 1156 chipsets are the best? So Intel has a habit of kind of going through sockets quicker than AMD does, or at least backwards compatibility with processors and sockets. The 1156 socket will still be around for the rest of 2010 and probably all of 2011. As far as which chipsets are the best, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, P55 is the best performance chipset. I'm trying to remember what the name of the chipset that came out with Clarkdale that has it's basically the same. Basically all the chipsets for that socket are going to be very, very, very similar because so many of the features are actually on the processors themselves, whether that be the PCI Express, memory controller, even the integrated graphics in the case of the Clarkdale parts. So I wouldn't worry too much about which chipset, just kind of find a board that has the features you want. As for will it be replaced anytime soon? Kind of. They've announced that Sandy Bridge, which is their next generation part, will be out in Q1 2011. It will have, I am told, still, I think it will have 1155 pins, simply, and it will be keyed differently because the processors will be electrically incompatible.
Oh,
so
interesting.
That way you don't accidentally put the processor in the wrong socket, even though they kind of look like they could fit. They will be keyed on the side, so it won't really fit in there.
I think that's a good reason to change socket because it's electrically incompatible, or there were power requirements that weren't going to work based on the existing processor. Because sometimes it seems like Intel and AMD have upgraded sockets just because they wanted everybody to buy new motherboards. Right. Yeah. So will it be replaced anytime soon? It will. There will be newer options, but they will still be making 1156 compatible processors through 2011. I'm quite sure. So if you're looking for a system upgrade, I wouldn't hold back because of that. What is our next question up here? You want to grab this one from Reaper 70? Reaper 70. What is the advantage, if any, of eSATA when looking for an external drive? Is USB 3.0 a better alternative? I'm not a huge fan of eSATA as an actual physical plug. eSATA performance is actually pretty nice compared to USB 2.0, but eSATA is not. If you're going to connect something via eSATA and leave it there relatively permanently and never move it, like the back of my DirecTV box or an editing station, great. If you actually want to move the drive around, I would probably look towards USB 3.0.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things the problem with eSATA is you never know. Some of them provide enough power for a hard drive. Some of them don't provide enough power for a hard drive. Depends on what kind of motherboard you have and whether or not they are pushing enough amperage via a USB port through that eSATA. It kind of got complicated there. I do think in my opinion, the life of eSATA is kind of gone now that USB 3.0 is pretty much here, and USB 3.0 provides performance better than eSATA.
I was going to say, is it multiples better performance than eSATA?
No. So let's see. 5 gigabits per second is what USB 300 megabytes per second. So it's about it's pretty close to the same, I guess, in theory, because eSATA is a SATA 3.0. No, okay, so 3.0 gigabits per second. So yeah, USB 3.0 is faster, but you get the benefits of hot plug support. It just seems like a more stable connectivity option than eSATA. Just in terms of universal acceptance.
So I guess the answer for Reaper 70 is that eSATA doesn't have an advantage at this point. Please start moving towards USB 3.0 for longevity and your own personal sanity if you plan on moving the drive around.
Yes, agreed. The real Joshua D asks, would a 4850 or 4870 or similarly priced 5000 series be a better buy for 3D gaming? kind of a loaded question. It really depends on how much money you're willing to spend. I think at this point, you can get a 5000 series graphics card anywhere from $60 up to $600. So, you get the benefits of Eyefinity technology, DirectX 11 support. I don't, at this point, unless you find what would be considered like a really, really good deal on a 4850, 4870, maybe you find some legacy stock left at Fry's or Micro Center or something like that, that the 5000 series is definitely the way to go in that debate. If you look at some of the articles and reviews like at PCPro.com or other review sites, you can see how the 4850 and 4870 compare to that the 5000 series. If you look at the articles right when the 5000 series was released, so you can see whether or not something does turn out to be a good deal. But at this point, I'm always kind of a proponent of moving forward. At this point, it's kind of not weird, but I wouldn't buy a 4000 series card brand new today. If you still got one, it doesn't mean you need to upgrade, but I probably wouldn't buy that new. So
that actually makes sense. Where'd that next question go? Sorry. Mike EV. Any idea if we'll ever see Optimus in Windows 7 for the latest 2010 MacBook Pro line? My lap gets awfully hot. So for anybody who's not familiar with the Optimus technology, it's basically switchable graphics, the idea that you have your low-power, 2D-friendly integrated graphics with your mobile CPU, and that gives you super battery performance but sucks for 3D gaming. Then Optimus technology allows you to switch on a discrete graphics chip solution. I like to say solution once a year. Normally, I only let marketing people say that around me. And that you will actually have your super cool guy 3D gaming. NVIDIA basically provides some. Yeah, definitely. They. I'm gonna say there's automatic graphics switching inside of the MacBook Pros already, isn't there?
Yes.
But are they
in
using
Mac OS?
In Mac OS.
And they don't use Optimus technology technically in the Mac.
Right.
In the Mac, what he's asking is I guess he's asking in boot camp when he boots up to Windows 7, since he has all that hardware in there.
Right.
Will Optimus work? And the short answer that I think is correct is no.
No.
Because there are some modest hardware changes that had to be made for a motherboard and graphics card to interface in a way that would allow Optimus to work. I don't think it's completely out of the question because so much of what Optimus does is software-based, but I haven't heard of that being in there. And that would have to be really completely, either completely done by NVIDIA or completely done by Apple. I see little reason for Apple to worry about creating a driver for people who use Windows 7 on their MacBooks. And I see little value in NVIDIA doing it because they aren't able to put an NVIDIA Optimus logo on your MacBook and get the branding that they want out of it. So if it's not working now, you'll get lucky and one day somebody will hack a driver for it or something, but I don't expect.
Yeah, I don't know. But I'm trying to remember if the MacBook Pro actually has both the Intel HD graphics and the NVIDIA graphics. I thought they basically went one or the other on that little tiny motherboard inside the Mac Pro.
On the 13-inch,
they do the HD. Right.
Actually, yes. So on the 13-inch. No, they have NVIDIA graphics on all of them. So what happens is on the 15 and 17-inch, they have a discrete NVIDIA graphics chip. On the 13-inch, they have an integrated NVIDIA graphics chipset on it. So yeah, the 15s and 17-inch MacBook Pros still have the capability. Technically, I would think they would have the capability to run Optimus on it because they still have the Intel Core i5 i7 processor that has the integrated Intel HD graphics on it, and they also have a discrete NVIDIA chip on there as well, or in the system rather, because Intel HD graphics do not support OpenCL, so therefore would not technically be able to run all the features of Snow Leopard. So they definitely had to keep either an NVIDIA or an AMD graphics processor in the system.
Yeah.
So it's still across the board.
You could almost say it's kind of moot, though, because the 15 and 17-inch MacBooks actually, in theory, automatically switch the NVIDIA graphics, discrete graphics on and off based on what application you're running. So in that sense, they kind of already.
But I think only in Mac OS X.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So, well, at least it works in OS 10, Mike.
Yeah. So the answer is why are you using Windows on that anyway? Right. I mean, that's what Apple would tell you. It's like no, just convert over. You don't need to run Boot Camp on that. Next question from Oi Horse says, let's see, I guess he's asking, should I put the operating system and games on a different hard drive, not SSDs, or hard drive seek and write speeds so fast it no longer matters? So I guess he's asking here, should he put the operating system and games on different hard drives, not SSDs? It looks like he's saying SSDs are not part of this equation. If you don't have an SSD, I'm guessing that it probably won't matter if you have the hard drives with your local OS, or you have your games installed on the same drive as your local OS, or on an external drive.
Yeah, because I mean a game loads its level. You're basically sitting and staring at the screen while the game's changing levels. When the game's not changing levels, it's almost invariably keeping all of its data in your main system memory. So I would say you're probably free to leave the game anywhere you want, because it basically, like, the game, everything gets sucked up into main system memory and the cache and the CPU, and that's where all your kind of gaming activity takes place until you finish a level and you start loading in additional, you load in the additional level and texture maps and everything required for that. I'd probably just leave them on the same hard drive. If you are looking to separate out things, I'd almost say put your scratch disk on a second hard drive, but that's only a particularly useful thing maybe if you're a big heavy-duty graphics or video or audio editor that plays around with that stuff. I'd hold out, wait for SSD drives to get cheap, then put your operating system and a couple of your main applications on that drive. But feel free to wait as long as you want, because there are $100 SSD drives right now that are kind of performance crippled compared to some of the faster drives that are out there. And man, SSD tech is moving so fast. I think anybody who doesn't like to buy hardware at will and has the money to do that, it's a hobby. They don't play golf. They spend their money on computer hardware. I think if you wait 6 months to the end of the year, you'll get a vastly better drive, or at least a whole lot more space and performance for your money compared to buying right now. Lightsworn, looking to buy a network at Lightsworn, looking to buy a netbook with a display out at 1080p HDMI. The ability to play flash and high definition screens is a must. Suggestions: hold out until NVIDIA releases the latest version of the NVIDIA Ion drivers, which for the new generation of NVIDIA Ion chipsets seem to be delivering better performance even on Hulu. Hulu is a really bad, Hulu's kind of seems to be worse than a lot of other flash-based 1080p systems based on end user experience. But I would probably wait for it's kind of weird because they changed around the architecture of the chipset for the NVIDIA Ion and the Atom processor, and that sort of made some things faster and crippled other things in terms of GPU performance, because you basically kind of have to choose where you're going to do the acceleration in an awkward way. I would probably hold out for as long as possible on this one, and maybe think about seeing what happens in terms of like the Broadcom HD. I need to play it because so much is changing right now with 10.1 finally shipping for Flash. Because I'm kind of looking at Robert Heron, the guy who hosts HD Nation with, built a pretty serious home theater box with around the NVIDIA Ion Zotac board with an NVIDIA Ion and Atom CPU, and it's pretty good, but Flash can still be sticky at 1080p. Just a lot of crunching in there, and man, netbooks have been really tough. I would probably look for something either with a Broadcom HD, and I would wait until the Flash acceleration settles out.
I mean, there are a lot of netbook options for what you're looking for. The Asus 1201N, and I believe 1201E, which is kind of the Broadcom variant of it. Those have HDMI output. The 1201N has the Ion, so you could be able to get some type of acceleration there. I believe the drivers will be enhancing that as we go. our mobile guys working on a review of that Broadcom variant as well. So we'll see how the new full version of 10.1 kind of competes there. But yeah, what Patrick said, it works. 1080p is tougher, definitely significantly tougher than 720p flash video.
And yeah, in Flash, like full screen H.264 and full screen. It's really funny. H.264 off of a Blu-ray, if you're using an external Blu-ray drive with the NVIDIA Ion stuff, actually works better than trying to use full screen Flash 1080p, even with the 10.1 Flash release.
Right.
Yeah, I'd probably let the dust settle, because there's a lot of people out there testing right now, trying to figure out what the best version of this is. Bry Guy 523. Any tricks to higher transfer rates on USB 3.0? I have an Asus motherboard and USB 3.0 enclosure, maxing out at 83 I'm going to say megabits per second on Windows 7.
Well, I think he's probably saying megabytes. I'm guessing. And if so, he didn't say what hard drive he's using in the enclosure. That's pretty good, actually. 83 megabytes per second from, if we're looking at the standard kind of 5400, 7200 RPM, 1 terabyte hard drive. It's not as fast as it would be on internal SATA, but that's pretty good. Obviously, you're looking at almost triple of what USB 2.0 would be able to get you on that performance. We can't really say anything else. I know if it was like an SSD and he was having problems where he knew the USB 3.0 was the bottleneck, I would say, are you talking about read speeds or write speeds? Those are going to vary for whatever drive is inside that enclosure as well. What are you copying it to? How fast is that storage device? And then if you really want to, don't get me wrong, I think everybody should get as much out of their hardware as they possibly can. But if you want to remember what it was like in the old days, connect that same enclosure up to a USB 2.0 port and copy files over at 22 megabytes per second and see what the difference is. Message us again and let me know what you think the problem is. If it's your hard drive, what hard drive you're using, and that kind of stuff. 83 megabytes per second. I would say if you were getting 100 to 110 out of a traditional hard drive, that's probably as good as you'd be able to get, because of the limitations of the hard drive, not limitations of USB 3 or Windows 7 or anything like that. So
good to know.
Let's see. Our last question comes from Naked Fable. Are 30-inch monitors ever going to come down below $1,000?
They already have. They call them HD TVs. Unfortunately, 30-inch computer monitors at this point are still, man, that's high end. It is a high end, expensive piece of glass, and they're going to come down below $1,000. 27-inch monitors are barely under $1,000 at this point. I'm probably saying end of next. I don't know. What do you say, Ryan? End of next year for the $500 30-inch monitor.
Right before we went on, I looked at the Dell Outlet. And this is kind of cheating because they're outlet refurbs. Sure. But you could get 30-inch monitors there for $799, $899, like the good Dell 3007 or 3008s.
That's really new, because I spent 4 months watching the Dell Outlet looking for a 27-inch monitor, and they had 0 monitors above 24 inches, at least on the days when I checked. So yes, so it's been a while since I've seen. That volume is going up. It's been a while since I've seen them. They weren't there today. Now I don't. If I said that, I didn't mean to say it. They weren't there today. But when we were buying 30-inch panels to do Eyefinity testing, we were looking at that a lot. Every day we were checking and that kind of stuff, looking for 3007s or 3008s that had DisplayPort connectivity and that kind of thing. So if you look hard, you can get them for under $1,000. They seem to have been. If you buy them new, I think the 3008s are like $1,300, $1,400. So they're still high. My guess is that, they're just, the demand isn't really there for 2560 by 1600 resolution panels. So
prices are slower to come down than we would have liked.
Yeah, and it's a piece of glass. Like, it's really funny. Like, everybody wonders like why manufacturers went from I want to say monitor manufacturers went from 19 by 20 to 1256 to 1920 by 1080, because they're at that point they're producing television glass. They can produce it in volume. It becomes cheaper. They can scale it up for they can start sort of sharing glass between inexpensive kitchen type HD TVs and desktop monitors, and the the 20, 23, 24 inch size. 20. I've seen 20, 22, 23, and 24 inch monitors all floating around there. But yeah, the 30-inch piece of glass, it's a high-resolution piece of glass. They're just not producing enough of it to make it very cheap at this point. I desperately want 27 and 30-inch monitors to scale down, because I can actually afford. I bought a really nice Dell UltraSharp 23-inch 23-inch panel. And I keep thinking like, oh, I want a 30-inch panel really badly.
Well, we bought, when we were doing Eyefinity testing, we're kind of spoiled here because we have 30-inch panels all over the place. I got lucky and found I found some used Apple Cinema displays. I ended up picking up 3 of them for $500 a piece.
Wow.
And they work great,
That's a fire sale price, dude.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's like at the time when I got that offer, I didn't really need them, but I was like, I'm not going to not buy them for $500 a piece. I'll find some use for a 30-inch monitor for $500. Yeah. So
that's a really nice piece of glass for $500.
It is. It's a nice display. So, all right. Well, that does it for our Twitter questions. That actually does it for the show this week. Patrick, if people want to get a hold of you, other than being at Patrick Norton on Twitter, which everybody should follow, at Patrick Norton and at Ryan Shrout, because that's where we'll quiz you for questions for the show each week. And we love fielding the questions, even if we can't answer them always, like the router ones that we prefer to give no comment most of the time.
No, not most of the time. I'm just feeling really, man. Well, I'm just really frustrated with routers right now. And I may be less, because I own a Linksys WT610T, which seems really nice, but I really want to look at absolute performance across three or four routers in my house. Because router performance varies a lot with the building you're in. But you can find me at revision3.com/Techzilla or revision3.com/HDNation. I host Techzilla with Veronica Belmont. We get our geek on every week, and HD Nation with Robert Heron, where we talk home theater and high definition and getting your entertainment on in a happy, high resolution way.
Are you lucky enough to be going to QuakeCon next month, or is Veronica covering that for you guys? Or
Veronica might be going to QuakeCon with Core,
Comic-Con.
Comic-Con. I don't know. Roger usually covers Comic-Con for us, but I think he may have switched con allegiance after the Great Hotel debacle of Comic-Con 2010. They changed the hotel system. I didn't realize how
quickly they sold out, but
Comic-Con really needs to move to Las Vegas, because they really don't have enough hotel rooms in San Diego. Do you want to explain what Comic-Con is for anybody in the audience who's maybe a little more computer tech?
I'm not really 100% sure myself because I've never been, but it started as a comic book trading and selling show, and it has grown into much like South by Southwest used to be a really focused show. It's grown into this behemoth of media, from gaming to movies to TV shows to, ABC will be there, and all the big movie studios will be there talking about their upcoming shows and doing panels and that kind of thing. It's really like a cultural phenomenon, pop culture show now than anything else.
Yeah, at some point they realized you could actually launch a movie or a television show with this core 20, 30, 40,000, however many people show up at Comic-Con, that they could actually produce enough momentum to really give a new movie or television show a particularly strong launch.
And I've been told. I've been told the reason I was going to go, that there are a couple of companies that I usually work with in the hardware world that are like, yeah, we're going to. I don't see how that makes sense, but okay, I'd love to go to that show. But I think I might have waited till too late. No tickets for sale. They're not doing any more press registration and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so.
You'll be scalping tickets on the street and probably staying, and you might be able to stay in Tijuana still and drive up, or National City and drive up to San Diego. That's not maybe a little more fun.
You can find me at PC Perspective, PCPER.com. We also do the PC Perspective podcast on the Twit Network. We record it on the Twit Network on Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. You can go to live.twit.tv and see that there. Yeah, so that's it. That's going to be our show for this week. We'll be back next week. Hopefully we'll have some more discussion about routers and which ones you should buy and which ones maybe you should not. I was debating taking a hammer to a Linksys router. Maybe we could do that live next week as well. That could always be fun.
Did you? Is this a router that died, or a router that
this is a router that
with? It's
a Linksys WRT something N router, and it's notorious for overheating and locking up, and then you have to unplug it 30 seconds and reboot it, and then it works okay for like another 2 days, and then it happens again. It's really frustrating when you're out of town and your router locks up, so you can't access your computers at home, and like your wife's so you can't
need to get
the things in.
You need to get the drill press and the hole saw and start putting like go fast holes in the top of it to let the heat out.
There were
Don't
laws that had.
I'm actually about to do that with my Apple TV.
Just be careful. Don't drill in too far.
The trick is to take the top of the case off first before you start drilling in it.
No, that's boring. No, you gotta just like while it's on and everything. We'll try that. So that's going to be this week in computer hardware. We record this show every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, again at live.twit.tv. And we will see you again next week for more hardware, tech, and talk.